Hello, hello, hello. I am your host OCL, and welcome back to 1 Century Later. Today we'll be taking a look at all events from May 9th to May 15th, 1926. As with last week, all of my sources are in the description down below. Sunday, May 9th, 1926. American explorer Richard E. Byrd and his co-pilot Floyd Bennett attempted to be the first people to fly over the North Pole. They took off from Spitsbergen at 1:58 a.m. local time in a Fokker F-7 monoplane named Josephine Ford. On the flight north, one of their three engines developed an oil leak, but Byrd pressed on. Using a sextant, Byrd calculated that they were at the North Pole at 9:02 a.m. and instructed Bennett to fly in circles around the North Pole while he took measurements and observations. Byrd and Bennett returned and landed in Spitsbergen after 1,535 miles and 16 hours of flight. Whether or not Byrd and Bennett made it to the North Pole is unknown, though. After returning to the U.S., Byrd gave his flight logs to the National Geographic Society, who confirmed the flyover, and both pilots were awarded the Medal of Honor. However, according to the ground speed of Byrd's plane, it would have taken over 18 hours to make the round-trip flight. Additionally, Byrd's personal diary of the flight indicated that the sextant numbers Byrd calculated had been altered, casting further doubt on their accomplishment. Monday, May 10th, 1926. Following the resignation of Poland's former Prime Minister, Aleksander Sierkiński, on May 5th, Wyszynski Witos became the new Prime Minister with a coalition between the Christian Democrats and Agrarians. Also on this day, France became the first nation to ratify the 1925 Geneva Protocol for the prohibition of the use in war of asphyxiating, poisonous, or other gases and of bacteriological methods of warfare. The Flying Scotsman express train derailed near Cramlington, England, while travelling from Edinburgh to London with 281 passengers. During the ongoing general strike in the UK, coal miners in Northumberland had removed a section of the rail in an attempt to deter coal-bearing trains from undermining the strike. Luckily, the train was travelling slow enough that when it derailed, only one person was injured and no one died. The 8 miners responsible for removing the rail section were arrested and spent 3 years in prison. And lastly on this day, during a training exercise at the Air Corps Technical School in Langley Field, Virginia, 2 airplanes, one piloted by Major Harold Geiger and the other by Horace Meek Hickam, collided in mid-air. Luckily, both pilots survived, with Hickam parachuting to safety. Tuesday, May 11th, 1926. Following his failed attempt to fly over the North Pole in 1925, and Richard Byrd's controversial attempt 2 days earlier, Roald Amundsen and his crew of 15 other explorers departed Ny-Ålesund in the Spitsbergen archipelago at 9:55 a.m. local time aboard the Italian airship Norge in an attempt to fly over the North Pole. During the UK general strike, the National Sailors and Firemen's Union sought an injunction that would restrain its members from joining the general strike. Mr. Justice John Astbury granted the injunction, stating that the nationwide strike was illegal and the participants of the strike were acting against both the law and the rules of their own unions, excluding the locked-out miners. And also on this day, African-American Henry Patterson was murdered and hung by a mob in La Belle, Florida, after a misunderstanding. Patterson had been working on a road construction project when he approached the home of Mrs. Bennett Crawford to ask for water. Crawford screamed when she saw Patterson approaching, and he fled. A group of about 40 men began chasing Mr. Patterson, believing that he had attacked Miss Crawford. They non-fatally shot him several times before dragging him through the street, beating him, and hanging him from the tree near the town's courthouse, killing him. 14 members of the mob were arrested, however all charges were dropped. Instead, the grand jury criticized Sheriff Dan McLaughlin for not being able to protect Henry Patterson. Wednesday, May 12th, 1926. The May Coup began in Poland as military units loyal to Marshal Józef Pilsudski captured bridges crossing the Vistula River, effectively isolating Warsaw. The newly sworn-in Prime Minister Wyszynski Witos declared a state of emergency in Warsaw. Marshal Pilsudski met with the President of Poland, Stanislaw Wyszynski, demanding the resignation of Prime Minister Witos and his cabinet. President Wojciechowski demanded the surrender of Marshal Pilsudski's troops in return for the cabinet's resignation. Marshal Pilsudski declined this condition, and fighting between the two sides began. Also on this day, the Chancellor of Germany, Franz Luther, resigned after losing a vote of confidence in the German Reichstag with a vote of 176 in favor to 146 against. The vote came from Luther's decision to make the old German imperial flag have equal status to the new German Republic one. The general strike in the UK was called off by the Trades Union Congress after the TUC president, Arthur Poe, reached a secret agreement with the chairman of the Coal Industry Commission, Sir Herbert Samuel. Many smaller unions that took part in the strike were forced to ensure their members could safely return to work on their own. Coal miners' strike that began on May 1st continued, with many of the locked-out miners feeling betrayed by the secret negotiations between the TUC and the British government. And lastly on this day, at 1:25 a.m. Greenwich time, the Italian airship Norge, carrying Roald Amundsen and his crew, crossed over the North Pole. If Richard Byrd and Floyd Bennett's May 9th attempt failed, this would be the first flyover of the North Pole. Italian, American, and Norwegian flags were dropped on the North Pole during the flyover. Amundsen would later write that, quote, "As we crossed the pole, a profound silence enveloped us. It was as if we were in the presence of something greater than ourselves." Thursday, May 13th, 1926. The Ponte Hercule Luz Bridge in Florianopolis, Brazil, was opened. This would be the first of two bridges built to link the Isla de Santa Catarina to mainland Brazil, and is still today the longest suspension bridge in Brazil at 820 meters long. Also on this day, the Italian airship Norge landed in Teller, Alaska at 8:30 p.m. local time, completing the first ever trans-Arctic flight and completing Amundsen's goal of conquering the North Pole after his failed attempt in 1925 and his successful attempt of conquering the South Pole in 1911. Friday, May 14th, 1926. Poland's President Stanislaw Wojciechowski and Prime Minister Wyszynski Witos and his cabinet resigned from their positions at 7 p.m. local time to prevent the coup from escalating into a civil war. Over the 3 days of fighting, 215 soldiers and 164 civilians were killed, and about 900 were injured. Saturday, May 15th, 1926. Radio broadcasting began in southeastern Europe as Radio Zagreb began broadcasting from Zagreb, Yugoslavia in modern-day Croatia, with Božena Begovic uttering the now famous line of "Halo, halo, ovdje Radio Zagreb," or "Hello, hello, this is Radio Zagreb." And lastly, following the resignation of the Polish government, Maciej Rataj took over as acting president, and Kazimierz Bartel took over as prime minister. And that is all. See you next week for all events from Sunday, May 16th, 1926 to Saturday, May 22nd, 1926. Thank you for watching, and see you next week.